Hello, everybody. Welcome to our National Quilter Circle question and answer live session. So I'm here with our guest, Colleen Tauke. We're going to bring her on in just a moment. But before we dig into the Q&A, a little something fun for you to look forward to. So if you're looking for more crafting, especially as we get close to Thanksgiving and the holiday season, tune in next week. We've got 5 days of live crafts. And these come to you from the National Quilter Circle, of course, but also the Creative Crochet Corner and Craftsy. They're all teaming up. You'll get a bundle of fall themed patterns and recipes, and you'll get these instructors to just guide you through all of those crafts with a live demonstration. And that starts on November 15th with Colleen. So Colleen, I'm going to bring you on here, and I'd love for you to start by telling us a little bit about yourself, of course, but also give us a little preview of what that craft is that we're going to be kicking off our Craftsgiving week with on Monday. So welcome, Colleen. Thank you, and I'm giving you the floor.
Thanks for having me. The project that I got asked to do was something fall, which is really wide open. And my background is originally in sewing and crafting, but then I converted to quilting and never looked back. So I originally went to school to actually be a school teacher. So I guess I'm still teaching. It's just that adults are so much more fun to work with because you all want to be here. You aren't saying, oh, this is, fifth period construction or food science, and you have to be here. You want to be here. So as you join us for all kinds of fun projects, the sky's kind of the limit when we team up like this with Craftsy and crocheting and sewing and quilting. The ad for this little mini series, that little turkey cookie is so adorable. I don't know if I could eat it. I'm sure my granddaughters could, and they would bite into it so fast. It's so adorable, but we're going to team up. And my portion of that is to create something quilted. So as I was thinking about fall and the autumn season and Thanksgiving and everything, I thought it's got to be something quick, something we can actually use. And we're all in the kitchen. If you're not making that adorable turkey cookie, you're making actual turkey and you're baking pies and things. And what do we utilize the most but a pot holder or even a little mug mat, because I made it in 2 different sizes so that you could use a little longer and have it around. But I came up with this really cute acorn shape, and my husband's a forester, so how perfect is that to use an acorn shape? And then I had this adorable grouping of kind of fall prints that kind of has some neutral, but a little bit of rust in there with some taupe and browns. And I thought, I think these are paired up perfectly to create a fun little placemat or a little pot holder and a mug mat in an acorn shape. But I'm going to teach you a little bit of how to create diagonal rows in there. And we're going to have some really fun a fun way to learn a technique. Maybe you haven't used offset rows before, and learn that little technique and have something great that you can have out for your Thanksgiving. So join us for the mini series. It's going to be fun.
All right. Well, thank you for introducing that, giving us a little sneak preview of what to expect. So hopefully if you're watching today and you have some time, jump in next week and get started with Colleen's project. Now, Colleen's also here to answer all of your questions in the time that we have today. So I'd like to draw your attention to the chat box. Some of you have already found it. You've already put some questions in, so we'll be ready to get started in a moment. But if you're new or you've never asked a question before, go ahead and find the chat box. That's where you're going to drop all of your questions. Some of the time we crowdsource, so we ask for suggestions. And it's also kind of fun. Some people are saying hello already. Just say hi. Let us know where you're viewing from so we can see how big our community is today. So with that said, I'm going to say hello to the people that have already dropped in. We've got Penny from North Carolina. Linda's coming in from New Hampshire. Alicia from Mexico. Welcome, welcome. We want to keep you coming, keep you saying hi, share your thoughts, share your questions so that Colleen can answer those for you. We're going to go right up to the top of the chat box with our first one. This came in from, it looks like Gigi in the username. And Gigi's question is, what is the best long arm sewing machine that won't break the bank? What do you think, Colleen?
Oh, that's kind of a wide open question. Long arm machines are more popular today than at any point in the past. Simple. It kind of depends on what kind of quilting you're going to be doing, how much space you have, and how high your budget can go. Because my mother-in-law's could have broken the bank. I think she got all the bells and whistles and the computer to drive it. So it's an absolutely beautiful machine. The Statler Stitcher is really nice, but there are other brands out there that are equally usable. There are probably, how many? Trying to think. APQ, Handy Quilter. Um, I can think of 5 different brands off the top of my head. So it kind of depends. Do your research. The other thing is decide if you want to be able to do large quilts. If you're wanting to do something that, you're a quilter and you always make a queen size quilt, because I know you. I know quilters who always make a big quilt, and those are the quilts you want to be able to complete on your own. You're going to have to look at that frame size, how much room you have in your home, or a basement room, or something that you want to have dedicated for that space, for that frame to fit into. And you have to be able to move around it too. So don't get too tight on space. So if that's what you're wanting to do, you're going to have to go up the price point a little bit in order to get that bigger frame. There are also sit-down machines. So that means that the machine itself is that oversized machine, but you have a smaller kind of table that you sit at, and you're actually maneuvering the quilt under the needle, which is different because in most long arms, you're actually moving the machine itself with handles up high. So it also depends on, have you ever tried any of the long arm machines? If you have dealers near you, go in and talk to them. Actually try it. See how you like it. Sadly, I've known a quilter who bought a long arm and after a while decided they hated it. They just didn't like it. And it wasn't for them. So their quilts went off to a long armer and they ended up selling the machine. Others have gotten machines, didn't even know how to use them when they got them, and turned into the most beautiful long arm quilters we have and win awards for their quilting. So you kind of need to sit down and prioritize, how much is my budget? What do I want to accomplish with my machine? And how much space can I actually set aside in my home for that machine, so that you can weigh that out and figure out at what price point, I can't go beyond. And are you finishing quilts just for yourself, or are you going to use this as a business? Because that makes a difference too. Because if you're going to be making this into a business, that will offset the cost, and maybe you can push that ceiling a little further if there is going to be a big enough need in your area for having you do other customer quilts, and that can offset the cost too. I know myself, as I got into long arming, I had used my mother-in-law's long arm machine. I'd used one in the workspace where I actually worked for a quilt magazine. I'd use a girlfriend's long arm machine. So I'd use different machines over the time, and eventually did purchase my own machine. I did purchase it used. Be cautious as you do that, though. You need to know how many stitches are on that machine, because the machines have, pretty much all machines, I believe, have a memory in there, so they know how many millions of stitches they've gone. So how many miles, like an odometer on a car. And for a machine to go millions of miles or millions of stitches is not uncommon. So don't think that that is a really heavily used machine that doesn't have a lot of life left in it. These machines are built to go millions of miles, millions of stitches. So don't let that scare you, but know how much, how well it was maintained. Again, the size of the machine and what its original cost was for the age of the machine. There's a lot of things to consider. And I really can't say that there's one machine that's better than another. I've used so many different brands, and all of them are relatively produce a nice solid stitch. And so you have to decide for yourself, where is that break the bank line? It's no different than going to buy a car. And you can have all the bells and whistles, or you can decide, I just need this X, Y, and Z. So that you don't get overly impressed by all the bells and whistles if you're not going to be using them. Some machines are basically driven by you. So you do all of the motion itself. Other machines have tablets or computers that can drive the machine. You do still have to monitor everything and put in the parameters of where you want it to stitch, but that tablet will add cost to the machine. So consider if you want to upgrade to having a tablet that will do a computerized design across your quilt or in sections of your quilt. Those are all things. So you have a journey to go on when you decide that you want to jump into the long arm realm. Good luck.
Well, we're going to stay talking about long arms with our next
Okay.
question as well. So this one comes in from Sandy. And Sandy, also, if there's any clarification you want to add in while Colleen takes this, you can drop that into the comments as well, and I'll keep an eye out. So Sandy says that I've never taken my quilts to a long armor, but would now like to HMI current Prave a computerized all over design on my current project. What do I need to do to make the long arm experience good? So what I'm not sure if Sandy is looking to do the long arm herself or send it off. So I would say, Colleen, just start us off, and I'll keep an eye. Again, Sandy, if you want to specify, I'll keep an eye for that comment.
Okay. Yeah, because there is an opportunity in some areas that you can take a course on a long arm that someone owns. A lot of times it's in a quilt shop. I know there are at least one or two in my area where you go and take a class. So you learn how to get certified on that machine. So you know the workings of it, how the quilt is loaded on that machine, because each of them is a little bit different. They have bars in different places where you load backing and batting and pin a certain way. So they will teach you how to load a quilt on that, and then how to actually use the mechanism, because the buttons that are on long arms, different ones for needle up and down. Some are for slowing down as it gets into an area where you're going to turn around or make a back stitch area or overlap your stitching. So the buttons work in different ways on different machines. So that certification that you can take at a quilt shop then will give you like basically like a driver's license to use that machine. And then you have to call the store or the owner and set up a time. So you then take a time slot that you can come in and do your own quilt on that machine once you're certified. If you're talking about taking it to a long armor to have them do the design, a lot of times a long armor who does quilts for clients will have, if you want an edge to edge computerized design, will have samples, or will have, I know of at least a couple that have binders where you can select designs with that they have on their computer, because not everyone has bought every design out there. It would be a huge number of designs. So you go through the binder, you pick out the design that you want, and then the scale, how large you want that to be on, if it's something that can be changed. Some quilters will do edge to edge using a pantograph, which is following a set design, and it's not something that can be shrunk down. But if it's a computerized one, that can be scaled to fit a certain section, like a border, or if you want it to be a certain size across the quilt. So you would speak with the long armor and set that up, how big that design will be, how dense the stitching will be, the thread color. If you've never taken anything to a long armor before, know that you should not layer the quilt, the batting and backing ahead of time. Do not create that quilt sandwich, because they are going to load it onto bars on their machine where the back is loaded in one place, the top is loaded in another, and then the batting will go in between. And as they advance the quilting, those pieces roll themselves together into a sandwich. A lot of times when we do our own quilting on our domestic sewing machines, we're sitting and we're layering everything together, and we either spray baste those layers, or we pin baste, or even by hand we may baste across that, and we're creating the quilt sandwich before we start to do the quilting. But in long arming, the pieces have to be separate as they're delivered to the long armor. So if you haven't taken anything to a long armor before, know that you should not layer those ahead of time. You should, though, make sure that your quilt top is properly pressed, nice and neat. All threads are or trimmed and any stray threads clipped and neat as you possibly can create. Make sure your batting is large enough so that you have about a 4 to 5 inch extra on both sides and the top and bottom of your quilt. Don't get it too close. It needs to be big enough so they can get it onto the machine and the machine doesn't catch on the edge. If it's really close, as the machine moves back, it can buckle and catch and cause an issue. Make sure that your backing is also properly, if you're going to need to pre-wash it, it needs to be pressed. Make sure that it's squared up on the ends. That's the other thing. Quilters tend to say, oh, I got my backing and here you go. And then they give it to us and the end isn't cut straight. And we have a hard time telling where straight of grain is on it. So make sure that the ends, the beginning and the end of that length of fabric are straightened or ripped. If you're a person who rips fabric, that's fine, but at least top and bottom are nice and straight then with your selvages. And that if it's a pieced backing, that the seam allowance is pressed either to one side, if that's what you prefer, or pressed open. So by preparing those, your long armor will love you as a client and want you to come back.
That's
Do we have any clear?
Sorry, that's exactly what Sandy was looking for. So
Perfect.
That's perfect. Okay, Sandy, thank you for dropping in that clarification as well. So if you're sending your quilt out to a long armor, those last bits of detail, that second half of Colleen's question, that's for you. Let's move on here. If you're done, Colleen, I know I jumped in a little bit. Did you have anything to add?
No, I just wanted to make sure that if she clarified, we got it all, because half an answer is not fun because you get done and you're like, darn, I wanted the rest of it.
Perfect. Well, we can go back to long arm if anyone out there has more questions about long arming. If you're looking for suggestions, I've noticed a couple viewers have dropped in some long arms that they love. So there are some recommendations in the chat box if you're looking for your own. But we're going to move away from long arm for just a moment and talk about the holidays. So Molly's got a question here, and Molly wants to know, do you prefer, Colleen, to make quilts during the holiday season or quicker projects, more like table runners or placemats, to give as gifts?
That's a very good question. Now, if I'm making you a quilt for Christmas, I've started in August and it's already done at this point. Quilts take time, and we as quilters do not like to be under the crunch at the end. So I tend to, if I'm making quilts, I've been actually known to me making winter quilts in July. So things with flannel, even the hottest thing you can possibly work with. I usually tend to work ahead. If I'm giving gifts as quilts, they're going to be done about this point in the season. And now I'm looking at doing mug mats. I'm looking at table runners. I'm looking at wall hangings, table toppers, coasters, making those fun little things that just you can add on to either a gift or give as something personal, because we all get stuck right now, especially with shopping, that not everything's available that we may want. And giving something of yourself, that personal gift, that's, I think, sometimes giving twice. So unless you know for sure that that person has no desire for a homemade gift, and then I wouldn't worry about it. But when it comes to those homemade gifts, those small things are just as valuable and used, sometimes more often. You know, that mug mat that they use for their coffee break every day at work is something personal that goes on their desk that, you know, they can't get anywhere else. So those small projects are the ones I like to work on. I'm actually working on, and I'm going to pull in here quick, I'm working on a table topper for a free pattern, which should be up later this month. So on National Quilter Circle, be looking for a free pattern coming up. I am working in traditional Christmas colors, and I'm doing foundation paper because I absolutely love these fun triangles and diamonds, but I don't want to cut them. And I can get the precision that I like by using the foundation. So because this is the time of year, my big stuff is done and I'm into the smaller stuff. This is the mindless stuff. I can just cut chunks of fabric and sew and keep going, and then trimming pieces down and start creating the last pieces that are going to go together. This is going to be created in kind of a 9-patch pattern. So there are going to be 4 of these blocks. This block isn't quite done yet. I was actually working on it right before I jumped in to do this. So there's going to be 4 of the blocks that look similar to this. And then there's a surprise block in the very center. So if you like that mindless kind of sewing like I do, at the end, come join us for a free pattern that you'll find on Facebook soon.
All right, that sounds like a really good idea for some gift giving. Thank you. We're going to go back to the quilting part of quilting here with Sherry's question. So Sherry's in Portland, Oregon. Thanks for joining us all the way from the West Coast. I am attempting my first quilt using my standard sewing machine. Planning on a baby quilt with cotton batting and a simple grid quilting pattern. I'm wanting the crinkly look when it's washed and as soft as possible. I can't find clear information online about how far apart I should be quilting my lines to keep the quilt soft, but also to get the crinkles. So what differences might I see with lines that are quilted a half an inch apart versus 1, 2, 3, 4 inches apart?
Okay. Good question. Especially as a beginner, that's a really good question to ask, because we can produce a top, but then we got to get the quilting done so it's usable. And your question is excellent. Look at the batting package for suggestion on spacing it'll give you a minimum spacing at least to start. So on the package of that your batting will actually say on it, the minimum needs to be at least 3 inches apart or 4 inches apart. So that's a place to start, especially if you're using 100% cotton. Now, if it's going to be a baby quilt, you're going to want to quilt a little bit tighter than, and I'm not saying super dense, but a little bit closer. If it suggests, say, 3 inches, I would probably go 2 inches, just because baby quilts tend to get washed more often. They take a lot of wear and tear, especially if they're at my grandkids' houses. I think so they're always getting laundered. They're getting drug around, especially if they're a really beloved quilt. They get drug around a lot and they need to be laundered. So that the little bit tighter spacing on the quilting will keep that batting stable inside there and not create a shift or a bunching inside. The other thing is when it comes to that crinkle effect, the crinkle effect is from the washing. And that happens as soon as you put it into warm water in a dryer. You're going to get that crinkly feeling. And even on quilts that I have seen, antique quilts, things that are, well, I shouldn't say antique quilts if I was going to say 50 years old, because that would put me in the antique category. But I've seen quilts that are older ones, and the quilting was, say, even an inch apart. It was hand quilted, just to be fair. So hand quilting tends to be not as tight of a quilting, but you got that crinkly feel. So an inch and a half, I think I would probably not go, if you're going to do a grid kind of pattern, either diagonal grid in order to create kind of on point kind of look, or if you're going to do straight lines and crisscross, like a window pane, I don't think I would go an inch and a half to 2 inches just to keep it secure, because it is a baby quilt, and you will get that crinkly feeling when it's washed. All the sizing and the starches go out of our fabrics, and that's when you get that really homey feel, that loved feeling in a quilt. And with more washing, it just gets softer and softer with age. So know that it's just going to get better and better as it's used.
All right, thank you for that. That's really helpful information. We're going to talk materials here as well. Different kind of care here. So Rhonda is making bowl covers as a present and wants to know if there are materials that she should steer clear from if someone was going to put it in the microwave. So not the washing machine, the microwave.
Yeah, microwave. And if you're making bowl koozie or the cozies, the little ones you put underneath that have batting in them to like heat soup or something in the microwave, everything, absolutely everything needs to be 100% cotton, or you will cause a fire. And I've known people who have done it and not to put on percent cotton and didn't think about it. And yeah, it's not good. Definitely not what you want to have happen this time of year, or as all the work you put into your gift. So make sure that your fabric is 100% cotton. There, if you have any question on it, don't use it. Make sure that's 100% cotton. make sure that the batting is 100% cotton, because a lot of times people will say, well, it's this kind of batting, it's 100% cotton. Don't assume. There may be a little bit of polyester in there. I'm trying to remember. Wrap and Zap, I believe, is one of the, trying to think. There are, I think, at least two different brands out there that are made for the microwave. So make sure that you purchase one of those specifically for microwave use. Don't chance it on a scrap that you aren't sure what's in it, because that'll be bad news. So I even saw somebody say, oh, they used an Insulbright because it would hold the heat in the bowl koozie. And I was like, no, don't put that in the microwave, because Insulbright has a metallic layer which will make it arc out, and you will have fireworks inside your microwave. So don't use Insulbright inside it. It's an insulator, great for pot holders, not for putting in the microwave. So 100% cotton. I believe the one is called Wrap and Zap. It was also used, people use it, quilters use it to make the bags that a baked potato for the microwave. So that I know, and I believe Pellon brand also makes a microwave safe 100% cotton batting that you can use there. Also, remember that your thread needs to be 100% cotton. That's the last thing. You're going to have those lines where you did any kind of stitching, and that part's going to get warm, and it could start to brown the fabric around that. The thread is very small, but polyester is heat sensitive to microwave, so don't, make sure everything's 100% cotton. Go down your checklist. If in doubt, throw it out. Pick something that is, because it's the last thing you want to have happen. But they're so fun to make, and I've made them before, so enjoy the process.
Oh, Colleen, I'm so glad you mentioned the scraps. If you're in doubt, throw it out, because we were talking with the National Sewing Circle about using lots of scraps at this time of year. So I think a lot of people are interested in sewing, quilting, using scraps for some piecework. If you don't know it's 100% cotton, use it for a different scrap project. So
exactly. You're making hot pads out of that instead. Just
all right, you got ahead of me. I was going to ask you that question, and then you launched right into it, and it was perfect. So let's go to Jan's question next. Jan wants to know, when using a temporary spray to baste a quilt sandwich, do I spray the batting or the fabric, or does it not matter?
That's a good question. I believe all of them have a direction. I pulled this one out. If it tells which direction, spray one surface only. It doesn't say which surface. So I tend to spray the batting, because the batting I know is like the size I need it to be underneath there. It may extend just a little, but that way I get the adhesive all the way to the outside edge of my quilt top. Because if I'm spraying the quilt top, I tend to stay kind of inside that, because I don't want to overspray and get it on the table or the floor or something. And then I tend to not get it closer to the outside edge. And so I usually spray the batting myself. But this one does say just to spray one surface only and then adhere it down. Others may be different. So read the instructions. If all else fails, our moms told us to read the instructions, which is sad that we don't. But there may be some variations in the different brands out there. So double check on that. Some may have you spray both and let them dry, kind of dry a bit, and then adhere together. Others, like this one, it says just to spray one side. So double check to see, because as soon as you think you have it right, you'll have it wrong. And nobody wants to waste the product. So, but the temporary basting spray is nice to use because it's quick. It's pin free, because I tend to end up stabbing myself or breaking my fingernails as I'm pinning. And I really enjoy using spray based on small projects so that I can easily slide it into the machine and not have a pin or something in the way right where I want to quilt at. So just make sure you read the instructions.
All right, we're going to jump back for a little clarification on the batting that we were talking about just a moment ago, the 100% cotton batting. So Sandy asked, is the scrim also cotton with that?
I believe the scrim is not. And then there is no scrim on the wrap and zap. So that's why the scrim is a kind of a coating that's put to the backside of batting so that as the needle goes down through, the fibers don't pull back up through with the needle and the thread, so you don't get what they call bearding. And it also adds stability to the batting. So that scrim layer is usually kind of an issue with probably it has some kind of product in it that you don't want in the microwave. And that's, I'm pretty sure, why they would say just use 100% cotton. But there is a blend, even on some of those that, mostly cotton, there's a little bit of polyester sometimes added to that even if it's a small amount can still be very heat sensitive.
All right. Well, I'm going to take a little breather right now. We're about a half an hour into our time together. So if you didn't join us at the top of the hour, Colleen is not only answering questions today, she is also going to be kicking off our Craftsgiving 5-day mini series next week. She's the one that starts us off on Monday. She's going to take us through a project where I believe you mentioned an acorn and a fall theme. So lots of fun that we're going to have together starting next week. If you're joining us today, I bet you would have a ton of fun to join us next week for that mini series, again starting off with Colleen's quilting project. Some of you have been asking about gift giving ideas and things like that, so it could be a great way to get started on some of those smaller projects that you could give away as gifts. And then, of course, if you haven't already checked it out, please check out our chat box. There are some suggestions coming in from viewers about certain brands people like, little comments on Colleen's answers, and of course, your questions, which we are going to get to again until we run out of time today. So thank you for letting me interrupt just a moment with those quick reminders. It's time to get back to some questions, and we are going to go to Richard's next. So Richard's is a slightly different twist on gift giving. So Richard wants to know if there are any gift ideas for his quilting sister-in-law. So if you are gifting to a quilter, what are some good ideas?
Oh, that's wonderful. You are very smart and you are going to be very beloved. Oh, wow. What direction to go for a quilter? If you can't think of a specific idea from her, find her local quilt shop and get a gift card. And that sounds like a cop out, but it's not. I've worked in quilt shops. Quilters love getting gift cards to their favorite local quilt shop. Number one, it helps out the economy because quilt shops have had their issues over the pandemic and they need as many customers as possible. But it gives her a day out to shop for whatever she wants. It's a wonderful idea. So, gift card, always accepted by quilters. They think of 10 ways to spend it, and that's half the fun before they ever get to the shop. So know that we enjoy those. It's not a cop out. Other things you could do is you need to maybe ask a few questions. There are always things that we would love to have added to our tools. So let's see if I can, and I don't even have it right next to me right offhand. Trying to think what would be the best thing in here a new rotary cutter, rotary blades, some really nice scissors. These are Karen K. Buckley. These are fabulous snip scissors. They come in 3 different sizes. So it can then be kind of what your spending level wants to be. As they get bigger, they get more expensive. There are, when it comes to rotary cutters, one of the nice ones out there that I wish Santa would bring me, Quilter, I'm trying to think of it now. Quilter Select has a rotary cutter that has a metal handle and it has a tap method for opening and closing. It is a fabulous tool. So Quilter Select rotary cutter is a fabulous one, and the 45 millimeter would always be appreciated. Scissors, large scissors. Those the small scissors like this are fabulous, but Kai brand makes a shear that is a beautiful scissor, and it's in the professional line. So they have 2 levels of scissors. The lower price ones are good, but the professional level just bumps up just a little bit nicer. The blade on those is beautiful. They're great for then cutting batting pieces and cutting backing and those things times when we need a long shear. So those would always be appreciated. Um, there's so many things in my head racing that I'm thinking, walk in your local quilt shop and ask the gal or the guy working behind the counter if someone was going to give you a name your price point. Say you want to spend $40 and say for $40, what would be the thing in here you would love? And they'll tell you. They'll give you a laundry list so long that you'll be like, I want to be out of here in 10 minutes. I don't want to be here too long because that happens a lot. So there are a ton of things. So if you can find a local quilt shop, stop in there. They'll help you. Within minutes, you'll have a list of ideas. If you have to order online, search Quilter's favorite tools. That'll pop up too, along with the brands and the things that I listed here. So you can easily get those, I believe. Maybe not. You never know what availability is right now, but those are all things that quilters would absolutely enjoy.
And this might be something that would be a great crowdsourcing topic right now. So if you, a quilter, are watching this and there's something you're crossing your fingers hoping that you'll find as a gift this year, maybe drop that in the chat so Richard and anybody else can grab their notepad and take some notes and then have a little shopping list. We're going to stay on the gift giving kind of idea just for another moment. Sandy wants to know, Colleen, if you use a light table, and then also, do you think they're worth buying as a gift or receiving as a gift? What do you think?
Most definitely. I can access mine really quick. I just used mine the other day, and it used to be that light tables were these big clunky box things that took up a lot of space. But light tables have gotten as thin as our cell phones. I mean, basically, it's not even a 1/4 inch thick. And it comes with a USB cord that I can plug into a brick or my laptop and just tap on the flat surface and it lights up. And I can do all my tracing for appliques or whatever it is that I want to transfer. If it was embroidery, any kind of stitching like that. So a light table like this is fairly inexpensive. If I remember correctly, I think this one's I know it's under $25. I think it's around $20. So you can easily Google. This one just says LED drawing tracing pad. So it is, and I'm not sure the dimensions on it, probably about, let's see, and it's got metric on the side. I'm really good at metric. Hold on a second. Find my ruler. The surface is 12 by, must be about 8. 12 by 8.5. So that would, it's not huge, but the nice part about it, it's easily stored in a drawer or even upright next to rulers so that it doesn't get misplaced and it doesn't take a lot of space to have in your, most of us find that our studios are kind of limited in space unless you are really lucky to have a huge house and huge room. This one works fairly nice. I really enjoy. This was actually a Christmas gift last year, so yay for Santa.
I remembered you talking about that for one of the projects that you showed us how to use it.
Yep, it's perfect.
All right, let's do Jean's question here next. So Jean wants to know, I've seen the videos, they say to use a steam iron, and then those that say only use a dry iron as steam can affect the shape of the patch. So I use a steam iron as I think it presses the patch better and it doesn't seem to distort the patch. Plus I square up the patch. Which do you use, Colleen? And then what are your thoughts on steam versus dry overall?
It is a constant back and forth for most people. When I started converting from garment sewing to patchwork and quilting, I was using a steam iron most of the time. Probably because I was used to using steam in garment sewing, but where I live, the water is extremely hard. So we have a lot of calcium in our water, and it would chew through my iron because I wouldn't think to get distilled water to put in it. So if you live in an area that has hard water, make sure if you want to use steam, use distilled water so that it does not degrade the inside of the iron. I was chewing through irons every 6 months because I quilt all the time. So my iron is on every day. And that, just destroyed irons one after the other. And they were inexpensive ones, but it's not fun to have to replace your tools over and over. So I tend to now basically go to a dry iron, but I use a misting bottle. See, there's always more than one way to get to this. If you like a little bit of steam, but you're afraid of killing your iron with harder water, I bought a misting bottle. It has a really light mist and it's super, super fine, but it adds that moisture just enough to get your quilt patchwork to be nice and flat. So that's another way to approach it, is if that way it gives a very light mist, it doesn't really soak your fabric, and that way you get that nice crisp look. As for distortion, I have seen this happen many times. If your fabric is, say, lower quality, it tends to be a looser weave, so the fibers are further apart. When moisture hits that, they tend to absorb all the moisture quick and tighten. Then you get distortion. If you're using a little better quality quilt fabric, you get less distortion because those fibers are already fairly tightly woven together. There's not space between them, and then you don't get that distortion. I have literally, I've been preparing things before, and I've laid out fabric that came from, I don't know what source, where it came from, but it was black fabric, which was what I needed to use. And as I misted it, I literally could watch the fabric shrink on the ironing board because when I had misted it, I'd gotten the ironing board a little wet too. And as it shrunk, there was a dry line down both sides. So the fabric shrunk in, and as I pressed it, it was probably done shrinking at that point by the time I put heat to it. But it literally shrunk in front of me. So that it is a possibility. So just stick with higher quality, denser woven Quilters cotton, you'll have better luck. And it sounds like you've been having good luck. So you're using good fabric. And the steam versus no steam, it's a toss up. Some people prefer dry iron. That's totally fine. It works both directions. It basically boils down to what gives you the best finished look to your patchwork and makes you satisfied with what you're doing, what you're producing. So there's really not a right or a wrong answer. A misting bottle like this may be your next, maybe this is what you want in your Christmas stocking, a misting bottle. So that you can put water in this. You can also put like a best press type solution can go in here, and that makes your best press or your pressing product go further because it's such a fine mist. Instead of saturating it, it just gives it enough light mist over the top to give you that crisp look. So there's another Christmas idea, and it's always going to be a 50-50. If you interview every quilter going in and out of a shop tomorrow at your local quilt shop, you'll probably find out it's right down the middle.
Well, there's other gift ideas dropping into the chat box, and I'm sure this is a helpful question and answer for a lot of people. It's pretty common. People do ask this question quite a bit. So that was super helpful. We'll keep the dialogue going on steam versus no steam. All right, let's go into Sherry's question. Next, Sherry asks, I finished a snuggle size quilt for chilly nights by the fire, and it will be pieced flannel on the top side and flannel backed. How should I bind it? I've thought about doing a self-binding. I don't think I want to bind it flannel. Colleen, what do you think?
I have done quilts like that, and I have used flannel as the binding. It is a little bit thicker. You're going to want to make sure that if you do choose to use flannel as your binding, that you cut your binding at least 2.5 inches wide, because to get around that thickness, and you know what I mean, when you got flannel on the top and flannel on the back, it's more dense on the edge. So you need the distance of at least a 2.5 wide French fold binding to wrap around that edge, and it will bind fine. You could do a knife edge on the edge, on the side, but you have to actually finish that by hand. So if you're not really happy, I mean, if you're a person who doesn't like to do hand sewing, that may not be your favorite idea. You would have to have a little bit more space out there though. If you were going to do similar to the knife edge, which is finished by hand, but wanted to do it by machine, if you had a little bit more to tuck in each side, you could do a machine stitch around the outside edge. There aren't too many options after that other than going to a quilter's cotton, but I don't think I would at that point, having used flannel for everything, I don't think I'd switch to a quilter's cotton as the binding. You could use one layer of flannel instead of using a French fold. Do a single layer with the edges turned under a 1/4 inch and go around the edge. But know that if you use single fold, it's going to wear faster on that outer edge. Just because there's only one layer of fabric on the very edge of the binding, that edge could wear. If it's going to be like the family favorite and it's going to get hauled around more and used more and laundered more, that wear is going to show up on that binding edge. So reconsider, maybe French fold binding is okay. Just cut it a little wider. You could even go up to 2 3/4 on that binding strip, because 2 1/2 works well, but you could go just a little bit more. Just remember, as you do your miter around the corner, you're going to be a little more generous on what you leave behind to get around your miter, because as you widen the binding, you have to be a little sloppier on your corners, leave a little more fabric behind in order to accommodate that folding in the mitering process.
All right, we do have time. We're getting towards the end of our session together, so we're going to ask as many questions as possible. I'm going to ask for a few quick answers here from you, Colleen. So the first one is going back to that 100% cotton discussion we had to keep things safe in the microwave. Judy did want to know if a cotton and bamboo blend would suffice, or would that be a no-go?
That I do not know. I'd have to do a little research. I have not read anything on use of bamboo in the microwave. I don't know how heat sensitive it is or if there's anything blended in with it. So I would have to do some research before I can say a definitive yes on that one.
All right, and then a follow-up question on adhesives that we were just talking about, some of those adhesive options. Patricia wants to know if you've ever used powdered adhesive. What are your thoughts on that?
I have not used it. I do know quilters who have and do like it. I believe Bonash is one of the products that has a powdered application, and they enjoy using it. So it's another option. If you don't like using an aerosol type thing and are worried about where that mist goes in your sewing room or in your crafting room, that might be an option. So yes, it does work. I personally haven't used it, but I know people who have.
Okay, Patricia also has a question here. Just come back to quilting and mattress depth has changed. So my quilt doesn't hang down far enough on the sides any longer. Can I add an additional border to just the sides or the sides and the bottom? This is a quilt that was finished in 2000, so I'm concerned it's going to look weird. It is a full-size bed quilt. What do you think?
Okay, this is going to be a conundrum. True, the colors may have changed. If you have extra fabric from that project that maybe you stored away, it might be something you could add. If you were to add to that edge, the process would be basically removing the binding on the sides that you want to extend. So maybe just on 3 sides is to remove that or loosen that binding there. And then create the piece you want to add, the width you want, quilt it, and then join those together. And I believe there is a Quilt-as-you-go that I think Ashley did one not too long ago that our moderator should be able to find a link for, Quilt-as-you-go, that where you join pieces together and then you camouflage the joining with strips. So they'll look similar to what your binding strip is, and then your fabric would extend and you'd rebind the quilt. The issue is, though, if the quilt was made that long ago and if it was laundered at all, there's maybe a difference in the fabric coloration. So it may look added onto. That's That would only be the sad part at this point. Unless you can find a fabric that's lighter, that will blend nicely. But a quilt-as-you-go method, you could add 3 sides to the quilt to lengthen it out. I totally understand that the mattresses just keep getting thicker and thicker, and our quilts just have to get bigger and bigger. But if you have that beloved one you still want to have on your bed, that would be one approach to doing that. Um, I'm sure there are other methods. Maybe someone out there in our viewers today has actually attempted that. So if you have, please jump in and crowdsource this one, because it's not something I have done, but in the process, thinking through it, that you quilt as you go. So you quilt those extra strips that you would put on, and then attach pieces that would go over the top of that to hide where the joint is at, and rebind. Having to rebind it, though, again, that you may not have enough binding. You wouldn't have enough binding then from the original quilt. So if colors, and that's a really interesting thing, because no different than the garments that we wear and find in the stores, the colors have trends and what's new this season. Quilting does the same thing, and the colors change a little over time. So finding fabrics to blend in there might be a challenge, because mauve is coming back, seafoam green is coming back. They were the colors from the 90s, but they're a little bit different than they used to be. So trying to match and find a blender in between might be a challenge.
All right. Well, you mentioned something that makes me want to jump to this question next. You mentioned quilt as you go. So that is a technique. And we've got a viewer that wants to know your thoughts on the quilt as you go versus the traditional quilt method.
Both acceptable. If you want to be able to do your own quilting and smaller pieces are manageable for you, Quilt as you go is a great option to try out. And Quilt as you go can mean different things. So there are some like table runners that are technically called quilt as you go, as you add pieces and you stitch down through the layers. But quilt as you go, when you're talking about a big quilt, is creating either blocks or strips that will be the actual parts of the quilt, and then joining those together, and so that you have just a small piece to quilt. And those are things that, it's a method that if you want to accomplish your quilt yourself and not send it to a Longarmer, is a fabulous technique to learn, because you have small doable pieces that you can easily machine quilt, straight line quilt, outline quilt, whatever you want to do, and then you join them together. It's a little bit more tedious. You do have to add what kind of looks like leading around in a stained glass quilt, so, or in a stained glass window, so you have a grid that's going to appear in your quilt. And it can be either a contrasting fabric or a matching fabric, but you're going to have that appear in your quilt. So it's part of the structure. So you have to like that look in order to go that direction. But it's totally a totally acceptable kind of finishing for a quilt. So I'm pretty sure that Ashley did one just recently on Quilt as you go, and it's a great technique to try out. See how you like it. Do something small. Maybe do a baby quilt that way, or even a table runner, because you can join 3 blocks together with this method and see how you like putting those strips between. If it's annoying, then you're going to go on to another project, but another technique. But see how you like it first. Test it out. It might be your next favorite technique.
All right, I think we can get 2, maybe 3 more questions in. So
Okay.
let's see what we've got. First of all, let's go back to the light box. Question about what you think might be a good size for a light box if you're doing applique.
With applique, it's going to depend probably on how big of a project. If you have your heart set on doing, 12 by or 14 by 14 blocks, you're probably going to want to look for something larger than this. Some appliques are just a few pieces at a time. This would work fine. But if you're going to be doing something like a Baltimore album quilt, where you've got these nice big blocks and you're going to create roses and paisleys and all this, and you need to be able to draw it out or trace things, you're going to want something a little bit larger. So kind of be thinking ahead. What do I want to do down the road? What is, if that's something like a Baltimore album or Hawaiian reverse applique is in your future and you really want to do it, then go for a little bit bigger light box so that you can lay out large pieces on it. But if you're like me and you like to do raw edge applique and you're just creating a bunch of little pieces that create to make a snowman, this is perfect. So it kind of depends on what your goals are, how big you go.
Okay, let's go to our rotary cutters that you mentioned earlier. So should I be cutting my quilt pieces with a pinking rotary? My current quilt is very frayed.
Mm. I would not use a pinking rotary cutter for cutting pieces, just because it kind of skews the outer edge of where do I put this under my machine and where my 1/4 inch seam allowance is. The pinking blade was originally, it's something that's more used in, how do I say it? I guess I use mine for more free-form cutting, not something up against a ruler, because that blade has that curve in it. I think I have mine down here. Yep. And as it bumps against the ruler, it can actually damage your rulers. So this is a wavy line one. They come in different depths of a wave so that it can be stretched out or more compressed. And you need to store these in a spot where, like, I have a thick wool sleeve for mine because that blade is now, it's not against the plastic. It's up where it can, if you rake your fingers across there, you could get cut. I basically use this for free-form cutting. If I'm doing something like I'm trying to create some free-form flowers or a stem on an apple, it's going to be an applique, I can easily just free-form cut with this, or I will use the rotary cutter to pink the outside edges of my fabric if I'm going to pre-wash. If I don't have a pinking shears, I can use the pinking blade or the wave blade, and then it doesn't ravel as much in the washing machine. But I wouldn't use this for piecing. People have enough issue when they buy pre-cut fabrics that are 5-inch squares or 10-inch squares or even 2.5-inch strips that are pinked. And when they get to the machine, they're like, where do I line this up with the 1/4 inch seam on my machine? And so I just wouldn't put yourself in that realm. Keep it for the free form or other ways of using it. Stick with a straight blade for patchwork cutting.
All right, one last quick question, but before it's going to be time to start saying farewell. Colleen, do you pre-wash your quilt fabric? What do you think about shrinkage and color bleeding?
Oh, yes. I will eventually. Well, I've had quilts bleed. Just be honest. That's happened to me. I've had that issue happen. But most of the time, I'm using higher quality quilt shop only kinds of fabrics. I do use fabrics from big box stores too. But the majority of my large quilts, anything that I've made that's it's a quilt. I leave the lower end stuff for my crafting kinds of things, but things that are going to be laundered, I tend to buy the higher grade quality fabric, so I don't have as much fear of them bleeding. But if you do have fear of bleeding, then use a product that either sets the dye before you cut your fabric. And there are products out there. I'm sure that in the chat, somebody's going to be like, I use this, I use this. So be ready because you're going to get comments. I tend to use color catcher sheets. And if I'm putting a quilt into the machine that has red or pinks or whatever in it, I grab 3 of those and throw it in the washing machine and make sure it's ice cold water and just pray. If for some reason it bleeds, it's not the end of the world. You have the opportunity to make a lot of quilts in the world in your time. So I tend not to be a pre-washer. I am a little bit, I want to get to the cutting and the piecing. Just to be totally honest with you. I don't want to have to take the time to wash it all, press it all, and then come back and cut it. It has sizing in it when I get it from the store. It's nice and flat. I just jump into the cutting. So there you go. But I've known quilters who've had issues and they're like, I've washed this fabric 3 times, it's still bleeding. And I'm like, oh, yikes. Okay, that's when you go after that product that sets the dye. And there are products out there that will set the dye in your fabric before you actually cut into it and piece with it. So again, there's no hard and fast rule. Some people wash everything, others wash nothing, and there's a few of us in between who wash once in a while. Like I washed the flannel on the back of a project I made this last couple weeks ago because the flannel shrinks faster. Flannels can shrink up to 2 inches a yard. So I didn't want that too much draw on the back. So flannels, if it's going to be a back, gets pre-washed ahead of time. But otherwise, I tend not to.
Well, we are closing on that debate today. So we got a couple good 50-50 debates in today. Colleen, I want to give you just a moment if you have any final thoughts before I'll take it over and send us on out. So what would you like to leave us with today, Colleen?
Be looking for the pattern that you will see these fabrics and these triangles appear in. That will be a free pattern for National Quilter Circle. So be looking for that coming up. Jump in and watch the fall Thanksgiving mini series. There's going to be some fun things. Maybe you've never done any crocheting or you're not big into baking, but maybe you'll be tempted. And follow me on Monday. We're going to be making Squirrel's Delight. I tried to come up with a name for my pot holder mug mat, and since it's an acorn, I was working on it, and I was looking outside, and I'm like, that squirrel wishes he found this acorn because that's huge. So join me.
Yes, I was just going to remind everybody. So Colleen is kicking us off with some Craftsgiving mini series. It's going to be every day next week, starting on Monday, I believe at 2 p.m. Central. So you'll want to pay attention to the National Quilter Circle page. Make sure you come back and spend the week with us, not just for the quilting project, but for all of the other fun projects next week. I will be there. We'll have a wonderful group of instructors, again, starting with Colleen, who we just spent the last hour with. So all I have left to say is, first of all, thank you to Colleen for answering all of our questions today. Thank you to our team behind the scenes, and thank you to all of you who watched. We had a fantastic conversation going on in the chat. Go back and check it out. There were lots of good suggestions there. And until the next time that we see you, I hope you have a wonderful time quilting, and we will see you soon. Bye.